Well, thanks, Kate, for joining us today and for agreeing to be part of the ASAA Oral History Project, which is intended to mark 50 years of the association in 2026. We were very keen to get to talk to you, so glad that you could join us. Uh, I wondered just to start off if you could briefly introduce yourself and sort of what your current role is and what you would say your expertise is too.
Okay, thanks, David. Yes, so I'm Kate McGregor. I'm currently a professor in Southeast Asian history at the University of Melbourne, but I also currently serve as the Associate Dean International for the Faculty of Arts at the University of Melbourne. So that's pretty much my current occupation. Was that all you asked about?
Yeah, I was also saying, what would you, if you introduce yourself, what would you say is your main kind of expertise? What do you you said Southeast Asian history, but in particular, is there anything?
Yeah, so particularly I focus on Indonesian history in my research, but my research has also involved some comparative Asian history, and I also teach more broadly across Asian history, I would say. So yes.
Great, thank you. And so if you're based in a school of history or history department, do you and have you always considered yourself an Asianist, or is that something that you've sort of picked up along the sort of, or is that a label that means something to you, or is it something that is less important, shall we say?
Yeah, I would say historian as well because of the disciplinary focus, although my work focuses a lot on memory, so it's interdisciplinary. But Asianist, in a sense, yes, always identifying with the study of Asia and also realizing that within some disciplines, um, Asia still, unfortunately, seems to also be, marginalized. So I'm very aware of the marginalized positionality. So for that reason, identifying as a person who works on Asia, yeah, and seeing connections with communities of scholars, like, for example, even in my own university, who work in Asian studies programs or Indonesian studies programs, definitely. So I feel like my centers of solidarity are across people who work on Asian studies as well as historians. Yeah.
Right. And have you always worked in a history school or department, or is it's
Yes,
yeah.
I've been here a long time. I first got my job here in 2004. So
Mhm.
I've been here almost 21 years, always in a history program. But, I guess that's a choice some graduates face, when they graduate from
Mm.
they want to work in Asian studies or in history. And it's been something I had to sort of choose from the start. But I do like having conversations with other historians and listening to those conversations as well as, listening to people who work in Asian studies. So I guess I enjoy that both the discipline, but also, other work on Asia as well.
I was going to ask you a little bit, and but we might get to about sort of how you've got to where you are and sort of what happened almost sort of before that you got
Yeah.
the position you're in now. But I'm just sort of curious then on that point. Did you find that maybe some of the other historian or were people faced with that sort of choice? And I was just wondering, sort of curious if you could tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
where most of your colleagues sort of ended up, say, were they more likely to end up in history or did they end up in Asian studies?
Well, I guess it's really a factor of where the job market is at when you finish. And, I was sort of lucky that when I finished, there were a few jobs opening up in Australia, also internationally. And so I was interviewed for some history programs, but also from some Indonesian programs, right? So, and some people, even including friends from other disciplines, would maybe just go for whatever jobs on offer, which may also sometimes involve language teaching, which I wasn't trained in.
Hmm.
But I guess it really we're lucky in a way that there could be two potential markets or possibilities of where to work, whereas other people who don't have a language may not have that option. So it really depended on where the jobs were, and some of my own PhD students as well would have faced that same dilemma. Do they want to wait and go for a history job, or just go for a language teaching program as well if they have the capacity? It just means that there's two potential pathways, or whether they want to be in Asian studies. So it depends maybe how committed they are to having ongoing conversations with history. And some of them also moved between, Indonesian language or Indonesian studies and then back into history. Um, yeah, so I think it was a product of the job market, but for me, I did know that, having been trained in history, that those conversations of the discipline was also quite important to me. So yeah, I guess everybody could face that decision, but you may get more options. And unfortunately, in academia, the job market can be so tight, you just don't know what's going to open up at what time. So you probably will put your hat in the ring for multiple things, right? And often people who do Asian history are also quite in demand in America, for teaching broader history. You'd know this as well, right? That you're expected to be able to teach world history because you have a knowledge of Asia. You can do the whole world.
Yeah, it's
So a common assumption, yeah.
yeah, so no, what you're saying sort of resonates with me in sort of international relations too, where people are,
Yeah.
yeah, sort of a certain number of choices, but and what was the consensus on that? Sorry, I don't want to harp on it too much, but was that there were that the even though there were two different paths, there was the history one maybe just a few more positions? I guess most every university will have a history department. Not everyone would have an Asian studies one though, is that, or an Indonesian studies one?
I mean, look again,
Yeah.
I had a job at my own institution just by coincidence that my supervisor was retiring at the right time, but I was also doing several other interviews, in Canada and over in South Australia, other places at the same time. And but luckily a job opened up here at the same time. And so I was eventually offered that job. So, just coincidence again. But again, of course, I felt comfortable in history and I'd already been teaching here in casual capacity for quite a while. But then an ongoing job opened up. So maybe circumstances, but I think I'm very happy that I did choose to stay in history. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, okay, let's go back a bit then, sort of
Yep.
before all these wonderful 20 years that you've had
Yes.
at Melbourne, to if you like your origin story in Asian studies or in your
Yes.
field. So, can you tell us sort of when, where, and how it began? When did your fascination or love for Asian
Yeah.
studies begin?
Right. Well, first of all, begins with a trip to Indonesia because I began studying a commerce degree. I almost did a music degree, but decided to do it.
Okay.
I really didn't know what I was doing because I graduated high school at age 17. I really didn't know what I was doing. So I started a commerce degree and I finished an entire commerce degree. But in second year, a couple of friends and I decided that we wanted to travel to Asia. So we saved up our pennies to travel to Indonesia. Um, and so we went to Indonesia for maybe about 8 weeks, just, traveling on public buses and following the Lonely Planet guide, going from Bali all the way up to northern Sumatra, on ships, as
Mm.
buses. And I just became really fascinated with Indonesia through that trip. I hardly spoke a word, but I just sort of was like my eyes opened up. I really hadn't traveled a lot before that trip. So I was just immediately fascinated. And as soon as I came back, I switched into a commerce arts degree and started learning Indonesian. So it was like some switch turned on and I was immediately fascinated. And that's when I had not done much history at school either. So I started studying history and Indonesian about my third year of university. So total course correction. I finished my entire, commerce degree as well. But as soon as I started studying Indonesian, it was so much fun. There were other people in the class. We used to do little plays about ridiculous topics, but we really had a lot of fun. The language learning environment is really fun. So I began to get really into learning the language. I would listen to Indonesian radio programs to just kind of get my skills up quickly. And then I'd done history. I only got to do like 2 years of history where I did Indigenous history and Indonesian history and gender history as my kind of mainstreams. And then, after 2 years, I finished that program, but kept learning Indonesian, doing night classes, and I applied for the Australia-Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. I also got accepted into that, which meant another opportunity to go to Indonesia and spend more time in country. So I kept doing more language learning, and then again, having finished history and going quite well, I was like, okay, I'm going to do honours. So then I decided, again, I'll do honours, and my first honours project was about, a photographic album about the Indonesian Revolution and how the revolution was remembered by veterans. So at that stage, my Indonesian was just coming together slowly, but I had enough language to sort of at least read, the captions to photographs, but it was a lot of visual sources and was only reading a little bit of Indonesian. So I guess that's sort of where the turning point is, this confluence of two new disciplines. And again, just sitting in those lectures and going, wow, oh, I'm interested. I want to be here. It was quite a contrast. So I really just became hooked then, plus that fascination with Indonesia. And then I went and did more in-country study, like at Satya University. They have like an intensive Indonesian program where you have language learning in the morning and you write an essay in the afternoon. So that was really consolidating. And I think I did that just after honours, and then my supervisor must have encouraged me to think about a PhD as well. So I had a few kind of periods where I took time off and travelled as well, or did this exchange program. But I guess already I was becoming deeply interested in Indonesia and things in Indonesian history, also learning about that. Like, it was so kind of exciting to learn about, what Indonesia's position had been in world history in the past. And I guess particularly like the role of President Sukarno as a kind of, important political leader. At first, there was the kinds of things that I was learning, but also about the New Order government being a very repressive government. That was also quite, fascinating to me. It was quite a bit of time before I learned also about, maybe all the political repressions in Indonesia. So again, just deeply fascinated with the country and really had a lot of fun learning the language. And I'd done French at high school, so I had one language before, but it was kind of really fun to learn Indonesian. And somehow also, I think Indonesians are very forgiving when you try to practice Indonesian compared to the French. So it felt a lot more relaxed to try and speak the language when I was in the country. Whereas when I first went to France, I was very scared to speak any French.
Yes. Very. Might say something about national character there or something, dare I say. But
Yes.
you've sort of answered this question, but I'll ask a variant. But anyway, we always sort of ask if there was a particular book or film or encounter that really
Yep.
sparked your interest. And you've sort of mentioned a few things, and probably including that first trip, sort of. But would you like to say anything else about that kind of category of things that maybe helped it really embed? I mean, you also mentioned the doco, was it, that you sort of focused on as part of your honours thesis? But is there anything else in that realm of popular culture that's been particularly important to you in bedding down your interest?
Maybe not in popular culture, more like it was just particular figures or incidents in Indonesian history. Again, I do mention President Sukarno just maybe because we read his speeches and he was just a very powerful orator. Do you know what I mean? So reading some of his speeches and looking at the way he just stood up for Indonesia and said things to like the colonial powers or to, the whole world at the Bandung conference, those kind of things were just really like, wow, this is quite amazing, because people have certain images, I guess, of Indonesia, but it was also like thinking, well, Indonesia's place in the world had really changed over time. So that was, again, striking to me. I mean, there are particular books that I started to read by scholars that also made me think, oh, that's a very creative way to think about how Indonesia works. Like, for example, John Pemberton's On the Subject of Java, which is all about, how Suharto deployed like Javanese cultural concepts to sort of, present himself as a king, but also how Java was so centralized in the thinking about what it was to be kind of a new order citizen, that kind of thing. So I guess I always read also quite, across different disciplines. I think he's more of an anthropologist, but, to think about different ways of seeing and understanding Indonesia were also fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And actually, I'm just out of curiosity, apart from else, cast your mind back to that very consequential first decision. Like, you said that you and your friends decided to go off to Indonesia. So whose idea was it, and why did you pick Indonesia or sort of as the place to go if you knew nothing about it? So,
well, this is also very interesting. On our first summer holidays, a lot of summer holidays, we went to Byron Bay, we stayed in a backpackers, and I think we met probably like a Dutch woman who was like, who had just been cycling around Indonesia. And she said, "Have you guys been to Indonesia?" You know, like, oh, what was that? You know? So it just planted the seed there when she talked about how amazing it was. And again, from that, it was about a year later when I guess I said we technically saved our pennies and it was not much money we had in our pockets, but it just became like, okay, that's the next step for us. That's an inspiration, you know. And my two friends were, you know, one was studying law, one was studying medicine, so totally different disciplines, but we just all, no, let's go to Indonesia. We feel adventurous. Let's do this. So and for them, you know, Indonesia, it didn't really plant the seed. It was just really more for me, you know, that it just changed my whole life direction. So, yeah.
Great. No, thank you. And again, out of curiosity, so did those friends retain any connection to Indonesia over the years, even if not the same degree as you did, or?
I'm not even sure on the question about whether they've been back to Indonesia. No, not in the same sense. You know, it was just a fun experience to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I still like traveling, but you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, fair enough. So you've had this significant chunk of your life involved with Indonesia, studying it in many ways, including in comparative context.
Yeah.
And I know that you've got many books, including one about the comfort women in comparative perspective as well, sort of. But so I was just wondering if you could tell us about one of your books or your articles or any other publication that you think sort of really best encapsulates your work. You don't have to leave it at one. If you've got a couple you'd like to talk about, then please do. I'd really love to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, David. Well, I mean, I suppose if I talk about the more that book, Systemic Silencing, it might be one. I mean, it's really interesting just even mentioning to you, you know, what were the key themes in history that first got me interested. It was also Indigenous history, which is about, you know, marginalised subjects in history and how do you access those stories? How do we look at things differently for subject people who sometimes haven't even been considered historical subjects? That is an underlying theme in Systemic Silencing because I'm trying to centre the experiences of women whose stories and experiences have been highly marginalised. And also, like over the years, because I first wrote about the Indonesian military and the way they controlled history, I was constantly fascinated with the way in which stories about the past are told and controlled. But in this book, it reflects sort of my evolution of an increasing interest in activism, which also follows the trajectory of Indonesia, where activism has become more possible around issues of historical justice. So in that book, I'm tracing, you know, several themes that have been there really throughout my career, such as history and memory, the power of history, what kinds of history are written or not written, what stories are silenced as well, and the gender element as well. Like, not everything that I've written has been always through the lens of gender, but it's certainly been an ongoing kind of interest of mine as well to teach. And I've also done research on Indonesian women and the political left and how they participated in transnational activism. So in this story, again, in Systemic Silencing, I'm also trying to centre the survivor activists and look at how did they engage with activism, what opened the possibilities to reframe their experiences about what had happened to them, and what kind of, you know, cultural context and difficulties did they also face in the context of an authoritarian regime where military violence itself was also silenced. So I guess that book brought together many of my research interests, and that would be kind of a good summary of the kinds of things that I'm interested in. I'm interested always in the questions about how do societies deal with traumatic pasts and memories, and then who are the different groups and interest groups here who also play a role in opening or perhaps stifling efforts to open issues of historical justice and memory, and what are the consequences as well in society. So I guess, yeah, that would be kind of summary about that book and the themes it brings out.
Yeah, yeah, so when you put it like that, it does sound like it's encapsulated a lot of your the things that have driven you over a period of time. So that's fantastic. Now comes one of the fun questions, I suppose, about your life in the ASAA as well. So could you tell us about again? You were saying before we started, you may not have the dates immediately to hand. That's okay. If you could, what you recall about your various involvements with the ASAA.
Thank you. Yes. So I remember attending the very first conference when I was a postgrad at UNSW. So and I think I met Michelle Ford there. We were both like postgrads in the same kind of probably the same trajectory. Maybe it was like my 3rd year or something of being a PhD student. I remember giving my first paper and being quite nervous, but it was a very kind of welcoming environment, and it was just, like it was amazing, like to meet people whose works you'd read. That was just such a big thing as an undergraduate. Oh my goodness, this is a real person, when you meet people. So that was the first kind of conference, and then I'm trying to remember, like that must have been around 2000 or something, around the year 2000. And then at the same time, it probably came out of one of those conferences we decided to form the Indonesia Council. Probably either that meeting or one after we formed the Indonesia Council. So I was involved in sort of both, like involved in running the first Indonesia Council conference as a postgrad rep. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I also served as a postgrad rep for the ASAA, maybe very early on, but I'm trying to work out exactly when. It must have been in the early 2000s. And then I think I kept attending the conferences. I was a fairly regular conference attendee because, the conference moved around Australia unless there was another clashing conference. I pretty much attended fairly regularly. And then I think I was a Southeast Asia rep at one stage. Again, I can't remember the dates for that. And then I do remember that one of my former PhD students nominated me to be vice president, and that you're like, oh goodness, what am I taking on? So that was probably at a meeting from the Women's Caucus. I think Hannah Loney nominated me to be vice president, which, again, when would that be? Because maybe that was 2018 or something, do you think?
I think so, because that's about when I sort of joined. I'm pretty sure you were already there as the vice president. Yeah, so let's call it 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So that's sort of my path with service. But I did notice there were a number of people at Melbourne Uni who were sort of long time members who kept meeting. But and I guess that was an inspiration too. Not everyone, but some people would talk about the ASAA. It's important to join, or you know what I mean. So it also came through like word of mouth, and I found a nice community of scholars there. And again, when I go to ASAA conferences, I will often go to all the papers on memory because I pursue my interests as well, not just all the Indonesia papers. I really take a bit more of a thematic approach to what's interesting to me. Again, it helps my teaching because sometimes I'm teaching about Japan or China, so I try to get myself up to date. So that's one of the things that I like about the conference. It's like a little update for me as well to hear what's the latest research.
And you were far too humble, but of course you forgot to mention you're also president for 2 years after becoming vice president.
That was, sorry, I should say that I'm assuming your knowledge, but I know we're recording this for posterity. Of course, if you become vice president, then yes, you're required generally to move up the ranks to president. Yes.
That's right. No, and you, as I recall, you were also there during the rather difficult. It was because it was COVID too, and so it was a really difficult couple of years there, wasn't it? So, but
goodness, yeah, it was difficult, but we did manage to adjust and flip to doing a few online events, and of course, I also put up my hand to run a conference that had to be cancelled. So that was very disappointing, but it was exciting to work with a group of people to try to put a conference program together. And also the one really nice thing about working in the association was the really nice connections you form with other scholars, different disciplinary backgrounds, but from different unis across Australia. So again, it kind of gave you like another community, working together to give people opportunities through the grants that we offer, or maybe there's the bursaries we offer for the conferences. So yeah, so there's some really nice things about working for the ASAA. And of course, I was there when we got the huge donation from Tony Reid, which also presented us with an amazing opportunity. So yeah, it was really great to be able to shape that as well and to ride us through a difficult time, I guess. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the founding of the Indonesia Council? I didn't realise that's when it dated to, but could you tell some of the people who are involved, maybe, and how how that's operated?
Yeah, I remember we were having, I think there must have been like a, you know how they have the sub meeting groups at ASAA? I think Indonesia, I'm really trying to remember when exactly we had that meeting or whether we had a name yet, but I think that several people, including the Krishna Sen, maybe Harry Aveling, Charles Koppel was also there, who was my former supervisor. I think people were having a discussion, probably Robert Cribb, about, you know, because the China studies already existed. I think probably Japan studies, they were very vibrant, and we had a discussion to say, well, would there be interest to have our own, you know, meeting on every second year? And then we all formulated the idea that we didn't want to make this kind of an exclusive club. We actually wanted, the reason it's called Indonesia Council Open Conference is that we wanted to make it free. So until today, it's still a free conference, and we hosted the version this year, which was returned to Melbourne Uni after we did the first one in, I think, there's actually some background on this that was just came out in the newsletter for Indonesia Council. I can forward it to you because Harry Aveling and Charles Koppel gave a bit of background on when it was created. I think it was 2001. We had the first ever meeting. So we did that first ever meeting, and I remember we sent out emails to everybody who was a senior Indonesianist to sort of say, we encourage you to come and encourage other people to come. And we got quite good attendance, and the conference has just gone on since then. We've been trying to host every second year. And what's very interesting is today, probably about 60% of the presenters come from Indonesia. So it's become really big for them, which is really amazing. So we get a lot of international attendance, and it's really, yeah, quite a great conference. So that began then, really, I think in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's actually that was what I was going to ask you, was sort of what sort of people are turning out, and sort of what position sort of international, specifically Indonesian scholars might have in that. So that's amazing, getting that many people.
Yeah, that's right. I think we had about 300 registered this year, and maybe I don't remember how many papers, maybe around 200 papers or something. So pretty strong attendance. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how that trend would also play out with the ASAA conference as a whole? I mean, have you seen a discernible shift in the makeup of attendees in the 20 odd years you've been involved? Or hard to say.
I think more people from the region, because again, perhaps also there's more capacity to travel, like maybe, or for Indonesian universities, I think that there is increased potential for mobility. Like there are funds, at least for some universities, maybe not all, for people to attend international conferences. So I think that's been a change. But the registration fee is quite high, maybe for Asian participants, unless I can't remember if we have a separate tier ranking for them, but that may be off-putting for some people. But yeah, I think over time that we have got increased participation from across different regions as well. Probably it's known also in Indonesia. I don't know for the other countries. You might have a better idea than I do, David, about attendance from Northeast Asia, for example, whether it's seen as a major conference or maybe people go to the American. But I've also noticed, for example, that now they have AAS in Asia. For example, they had AAS in Asia in Jogja last year, and that was very, very popular. I think maybe it was 800 people. So really, when I think those conferences are now also attracting a lot of attention. So, but I think ASAA continues to do very well, attracting a lot of people to come. Yeah, but that's an interesting point about the makeup of attendees. But for Indonesia Council, it's definitely swung more towards Indonesia, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There is a bit of an issue of a potentially crowded calendar about July or so. If there's ASAA, the AAS in Asia, and then the ICAS is the other one, I think, the International Conference of
That's right.
Asian Studies might be. So that one, I think last year was a bit of an issue with the conference in Perth.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming towards the end, what's your sense of the field? So we've talked about the association, I suppose, but what about the field as a whole? I mean, in 2025, sort of Asian studies in Australia, how would you survey it and assess it?
Unfortunately, I didn't attend the last conference, so I think I was traveling. But so my guide, like my guide is often the conferences, I guess, but also I guess the journal, David, which you've had a role in as well. So I think from the journal, it looks like we're doing pretty well. But of course, right now, with all the threats that universities are facing, we'll have to see, you know, how do people who work in Asian studies, how have they fared across all the cuts that are coming to universities, you know? Of course, it seems that languages always seem to be in a vulnerable position if they're not as well subscribed. So that could be a threat to the future of Asian studies in this country. I know people who do teach language are quite worried about that for the future of Australia. So I guess that's a great concern. And it would be very helpful if there was more government support, actual, you know, monetary support, encouragement for the learning of Asian languages. So I feel like that is a bit of a challenge at the moment. But just speaking across my own university, maybe I've shared this story before, but having worked here for 20 years, that it's taken a very long time, but finally we have a lot more, just, you know, a lot more orientation, at least in our university policies, about our location in the Asia Pacific, which gives anybody who works on the Asia Pacific kind of more of an in the sense that our region is seen as a priority. So I feel that from a university point of view, that certainly helps people within this institution. I don't know how widespread that is across other institutions, but obviously there's a lot of collaboration going on with our Asian partner universities as well. So from that perspective, I feel like there's a lot more depth of study engagement with Asia across our university. For example, we opened up a global centre in Delhi last year, which has led to a lot more, I'm speaking now from my associate dean knowledge here, for example, a lot more people, we've given people opportunities to collaborate with Indian partners. So we've begun to see new partnerships emerge. So if you do put something on the agenda, if you do pay attention to location, and if you do give people incentives, then they will follow. So just from the microcosm of our university doing that, you can see a shift. But I guess from the government signalling, I think the latest signalling is also Southeast Asia push, right? So that will be interesting to see how that shapes. Because I feel, for example, again, if I return to history, we have a very limited number of historians in Australia who work on other parts of Southeast Asian history other than Indonesian history, right? It's probably a handful. So yeah, maybe the government push to Southeast Asia will also have you know, other effects perhaps on the study of Southeast Asia, which probably is a bit more non-Indonesian Southeast Asia, might also lead to opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's it's interesting to hear you say that, and I think I think that is an issue that's worth sort of mulling over. So when we assess the state of the field, it's not just the people who are working in departments named Asian Studies. There's obviously people sort of more widely spread, which in a way is a form of insurance, right? I mean, there's the expertise in Indonesian history. It's just not necessarily in an Indonesian Studies department. So that's a good thing, but we sort of need to be fostering those the next generation too, with people who can work in the languages.
That's right.
And when again, you've done a lot of coming back to yourself as a researcher and as a scholar of Asian history, Indonesian history. What makes you excited? What's the next project, or do you have has your recent work sort of opened up some new vistas for you that you're keen to explore sometime soon? Or
thanks for that question, David. So I've just the translation of my book Systemic Silencing is almost finished. So once that's finished, I'll be doing a lot more discussion of the book in Indonesia, because that actually will open up a much wider readership, which is exciting. But I also just published a co-edited volume called Rethinking Indonesian Histories, Negotiating and Resisting Coloniality. And that's an edited book with a lot of Indonesian collaborators. So we're doing a launch of that next week in Indonesia, actually, and a few other launches around Indonesia. So I'm really hoping that will be a bit of an intervention, because in the last year, with the Prabowo presidency, there's also been a campaign to return to writing a singular national history of Indonesia. So it's been very nice timing that our book, which has the word history is in the title, is coming out, and it sort of explores colonial history in a very wide conceptualization back to the colonial period, but right up to the present, and continuities of colonialism in museums, in the law, and in cultural heritage, for example. So that book's also quite exciting, and it's related to the current research that I'm doing on memory activism in Indonesia around the colonial past. So I'm about to sort of begin writing that next book, which is part of a collaboration with my colleague Anna Draglovic, who focuses a bit more on the Dutch side of engagement with colonial history. So I look at the Indonesian side, she looks at the Dutch side, and we try to meet in the middle wherever they meet.
Right.
So yes, I need to get down to writing a lot of that book. So definitely a lot of work still to be done. Yes.
Well, hopefully your very busy role as Associate Dean is not taking too much. I'm sure it's taking quite a bit, but hopefully not everything away from you. So all your energies from the research side. Finally, I suppose thinking to the future and the next past the 50th anniversary of the ASAA and Asian Studies in Australia, what do you think needs to be done? What if you had to sort of nominate a few sort of action items or things that we could do individually or collectively to safeguard the future? What would you suggest we can do or should be doing for the betterment of Asian Studies in Australia?
I guess definitely looking for ways to, I guess, also work with the government so that there are still possibilities for people to learn Asian languages. I was just going to mention before, like with the NCP, the New Colombo Plan funding changes, one sort of thing that, as far as I understand from those changes, are that there's encouragement for language learning, but it is sort of emphasizing longer periods of language learning, which would make it difficult for our universities to actually do the teaching ourselves. So I wonder if with the new conceptualization, there's a push to learning in country, which in itself is fine and good if people strengthen their language skills. However, that we don't want to see a weakening of our own capacity to teach Asian language here for people who don't have access to that travel. So the foundation to produce scholars who deeply understand the region must be language. So I guess, language still has to be a core issue, but also continuing to have people excited about the field, I think, is important. So showcasing and giving opportunities for those, up and coming dynamic scholars. I mean, I think our prizes do a lot of work there, even for the thesis prize, it gives an opportunity for people to shine. So I think continuing to reward that work and celebrate that work, but we have a constant, battle to also, I guess, even as humanities and social science scholars, to demonstrate the public good, the social license of why our universities operate and why we make contributions. So it's also getting stories out about what we do and how we, how we contribute to a greater understanding of diversity in our own country, but also global kind of intercultural understandings as well. So I think it's just kind of messaging as well. Who do we reach with our messaging? And I don't know, because I'm not on executive anymore, David, I don't know how our membership's going, but I guess just making sure, that we are still appealing to people to be members of ASA and promoting what we do. So all of those things are important to kind of keep this community and lobby group as well going, so that we can continue to defend and promote study of Asia into the future, I guess. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. I think there's a lot of good ideas there, and guess the follow-on question, which you don't necessarily have to have the answer for, is how and and how far back do we have to go? I mean, so somehow it feels that by the time people are at university, it's almost too late to be sort of making those decisions. They're already in a course. I think somehow we have to get them at the school level or something, or the school age anyway. But I don't know how you do that. It's very hard.
I know. Well, maybe also conversations with the language teachers associations. Do you know what I mean? I don't connected you are. Because I don't teach language, I've only occasionally interacted, but probably people in language teaching programs would connect with them. And making sure, even just sharing knowledge across how different programs have connected with school feeder groups, or you know what I mean? I don't think there's any harm in sharing how people do things and how people have been successful in creating pipelines of students or doing more outreach. That's something our university is trying to do to widen participation, to go and speak to different school audiences. But, but thinking about that, yeah, you're right, hitting people much earlier in their lives, although it's never too late to change.
No.
You can
No,
start Indonesian when you're 20.
that's true. But again, you often do hear it comes down to those motivated individuals who are the enthusiasts and who can inspire their students. But the problem is what happens if they when they move on or do something else, or they get pulled in a different direction. So it's there has to be, it seems, we have to do something a bit broader to widen the base of people who can advocate and do it in the right places. Yeah. Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate your time today and your views on all these matters. I think this is going to be a great contribution to our studies. So thank you again.
Well, thanks so much, and good luck with the project. Look forward to the outcomes.
Thank you.
Okay.